Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. We are sponsored by Circa Million and Circa Survivor Contest. I am Jim Coventry. Today's show, we will analyze more ADP battles to get you ready for those late drafts. These are players in the same position being drafted in similar ranges. Give you some upside, downside, bottom line for each player. All right, we are going to begin with ADP battle number one. We're going to have Jaylen Warren, Tyrone, Tracy, and yes, we got to put Joe Mixon in there because his ADP still has him being drafted despite the injury listing where he'll miss 4 games. Let's start out with Jaylen Warren. Now, last year, Jaylen Warren was less efficient than he was in 2023. 2023, he really broke out and was a solid running back. But that 5.3 yards per carry in 2023 went to 4.3 last year. His receiving role fluctuated year over year. He did have 38 catches for 310 yards last year. It's not the volume we would like out of a receiving back. Now, all that said, we saw that his touches surged after the bye week last year. In 6 of 8 games, Warren hit at least 10 PPR points. Again, that's not a massive gold standard, but it is decent. But again, we mentioned his receptions, 38 last year. That fell from 61 in 2023. So Warren was really an ADP value last year, in 2023, I should say, catching those 61 passes. But last year, that fell by not half, but it was a good percentage. So that said, last year he plays 15 games, 821 scrimmage yards, which is good. But remember, he had 1,154 scrimmage yards a year prior, and I know he played more games, but it still was a decrease. So what do we expect from Warren? Najee Harris is gone, of course. Caleb Johnson's in. Camp reports have been mixed on Caleb Johnson, but I have to say this. Najee Harris was not the most effective back with the Steelers, and Warren was unable, or the team was unwilling to give him more of that lead role. I think they see Warren as a very specific player, and again, the high investment in Caleb Johnson in the draft tells you that they do have a plan of utilizing a bigger back. And we know Arthur Smith's offense, they're going to use 2 tight ends, 3 tight ends. They're going to try to manipulate box counts. The running isn't always efficient with that, but numbers, they do gain an advantage. And if the Steelers defense is as they hope, which, look, they have a lot of older players on that defense, but they are hoping to be a defensively driven team. That means they're going to want to run the ball. So Warren, even though he's probably going to maintain that similar role to what he had when playing alongside Najee Harris, it's probably the same role. Now, as to whether he catches 38 or 61 passes, that's where the rub is on him, right? Because if we go back to those 2023 levels, all of a sudden, that's a great value for Warren. But if it's closer to last year, now it's like, okay, it's fair, but not great. I still think overall, Warren is going to have a floor each week and a good baseline. And I think that baseline could be useful depending on your roster build in fantasy. I just don't think the upsides are. I think we saw the big year 2 years ago, and I don't think that's coming back. There's not. I mean, sometimes a running back has that year early, and then they just kind of become who they are. And I think Warren has some explosiveness as a solid player, but I think what we saw last year was probably closer to what we get. Again, for a floor, he's good usefulness at ADP. And then we go next to Tyrone Tracy. Now, Tracy last year, 839 rushing yards, 284 receiving yards. So that put him over 1,100 scrimmage yards, which is a very good season. Remember, last year, either Tracy was undrafted or drafted very late in drafts, and depending on the size of your league, of course. And but Tracy was a find, right? But I want you to remember this about last year. Tyrone Tracy took on the lead role in week 5 for the Giants. And through weeks 5 through 10, Tracy was an outstanding fantasy asset. He was averaging 16 carries a game, 5.4 yards per carry. It looked like you struck gold. But after that week 10 bye, coming out of the bye, those 16 carries a game fell to 12 carries a game. The 5.4 yards per carry from week 11 on fell almost 2 full yards to 3.46. Now, the receiving work doubled from 12 to 24 yards. But here's the point I want to make about Tracy. We're going mostly on Jordan Radin of ESPN's comment that said Tracy was always the lead back. It was never a plan to have Cam Scadaboo be the lead back. And that's kind of the end of the story. And pretty much the fantasy community bit that and believed that. And maybe it's true. But I want to point this out. We saw last year, as I mentioned earlier, that we saw the decreased efficiency after Tracy saw a volume roll. I think the Giants staff has to know that. And it may be true that Tracy may start out the year as a lead back, but I think those efficiency and durability concerns are going to be problematic with the more work he gets. So I think eventually Scadaboo becomes part of that backfield. And if he can't, look, Devin Singletary may not be a good running back, but he kind of seems like he can survive the apocalypse, right? So at some point, there'll be another back in his backfield. I do expect it to be Scadaboo, but again, it could be Singletary. But I think Tracy is not going to be a bell cow for long if he is to start the season. So I think if you're going to draft him, or if you already have drafted him, pay attention when the season starts, and pay attention if he gets a big workload early, and if it starts to go down a bit, or you see some decreased efficiency, at that point, you'd immediately want to look to trade him, because we could see a repeat of last year. But again, to start the season, he does look like a solid pick at ADP. I'm just worried more about the fantasy playoffs and the long-term potential. And then there's Joe Mixon. Team put him on the 4-game injured list. Don't know if he'll be back after then. Mixon, from a fantasy standpoint, helped his teams last year only through the team's bye week, because 5 of the last 6 games Mixon played, he was under 10.7 PPR points, again, in 5 of those 6 games. So he really struggled down the stretch. It was, a lot of single-digit games in their PPR-wise. But before the bye, he was fire for fantasy. He was really giving you that close to running back 1 production. And on the season, he still ended up with 1,325 scrimmage yards and 12 touchdowns. So it was a season. I remember Mixon missed 3 games early. But all that said, efficiency was a problem. And you don't care about that really for fantasy with points, but he was 19th percentile in broken tackle rate, 22nd percentile yards after contact. But I've been saying this for years. This is not a knock on Mixon. He is the great compiler, and there's nothing wrong with being a compiler for fantasy football. But now the age, 29, that injury, remember, we had the report in June. He'll be ready to go pretty soon in camp. And then camp hit. We'll evaluate him at the end of camp. And then we get to that point, it's like, not close. 4 weeks off. And who knows? This could be a really complicated injury. So betting on Mixon, even at this lowered cost in the running back 30s, I don't think it's worth it. And look, I'm a Nick Chubb apologist. So if you listen to me, you know that. And I have rose-colored glasses for anything Nick Chubb does. And I'm not saying he's Superman at this point, but even if Nick Chubb, coming back from that devastating knee injury of 2 years ago, he broke his foot last year. I don't think that one was an issue. That's a typical healed up and good to go. But I do think they're the same age, Mixon and Chubb. And I have to think that if Chubb is even at 80% of his old self, that's a better player than Joe Mixon was in terms of efficiency as a runner, making things happen. Mixon's just been in the right place at the right time for fantasy. I think Woody Marks has a chance of being something, especially as a pass-catching back. So if Mixon does come back, I don't know that he comes back to that volume role he had. It could be just be like an ugly committee. So I think really just staying out on Joe Mixon is probably the way to go. Again, even with this reduced ADP into the running back 30s range. So yeah, definitely got to consider that. But overall for this range, to me, the pick for floor is Jaylen Warren, between Jaylen Warren, Tyrone, Tracy, and Joe Mixon. That's my floor pick. It's Warren. I do think he'll have an established role all year. Tracy is the boom bust player because, as I mentioned earlier, I think he starts out potentially with a bigger workload, but we saw last year the fade. And so there's concern that if that continues, and they did draft Scadaboo, it was a 4th-round pick, early 4th-round pick. So it has to be a consideration that the team kind of knows there's durability. And then third, I'd really be out on Mixon, but I definitely had to bring him up. All right, the Circa Million and Circa Survivor are back with a massive $21 million in guaranteed prizes. Circa Million, you pick 5 games against the spread each week, 18 weeks of action with 126 ways to win. $1 million for the winner and $6 million guaranteed. The Circa Survivor, one pick a week, no point spread. You last the longest to win it all. At least 15 million guaranteed. You enter in Nevada, you play from anywhere. 21 million guaranteed. You visit circasports.com for details. All right, we are in ADP battle number 2 now. Remember, these are similarly ranked players in ADP. You have this battle. Wide receivers, you got Travis Hunter, Jaylen Waddle, and Jeudy. We're going to start out with Travis Hunter. What an amazing collegiate player, dominant at cornerback, dominant at wide receiver. He moves to the Jaguars, but there is uncertainty. We really don't know how much they're going to use him on defense, how much they're going to use him on offense. There is uncertainty there. The team can talk about how he has the greatest conditioning ever. Look, I get it. But we're talking NFL athletes. If I'm really going to believe that this rookie is better conditioned than players that do this for a living and train as hard as anybody else, I find it really, really hard to believe. Now, maybe on the Jaguars, he's the most conditioned player. Doesn't seem to be the hardest work ethic team in the world as it was. But I just have a hard time buying that. And my other concern is with Hunter, if he's playing both offense and defense, and let's say he plays a lot of snaps on both sides, to think he's not going to wear down in his rookie season, to me, that just seems overly ambitious. Now, as a receiver, I do think Hunter can be a superstar. I just don't think it's year one. When I watched the film on Hunter, he was able to win with his athleticism in college. Just beating the young men there was not an issue for him. But when you watch him move, even as a receiver, the footwork doesn't look like a polished wide receiver. It's not those wide receiver sharp cuts. It's a work in progress. He's going to learn that footwork, but he moves like a cornerback more. And so you kind of notice that on film and you wonder, okay, how does this work out? Now, it's possible Coach Liam Cohen just gets him in the screen game, get the ball in his hands. We know it's a diverse screen game that Cohen ran in Tampa Bay last year. Now in Jacksonville, that screen game isn't only limited to running backs, wide receivers and tight ends are part of this as well. And that might be the best path to get Hunter involved. But again, I think it's a tightrope act because I think if he becomes on film the player who he's going to see bubble screens, I think defenses may pick up on that and then defend him accordingly. So I think with Hunter, I would like to think there's upside here. Brian Thomas is a clear number one. I keep saying, look, I know Liam Cohen did a great thing with Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield had already had 3 years on his resume that were better than any season that Trevor Lawrence compiled. The offensive line was very, very good in Tampa. Now in Jacksonville, that offensive line is a massive question mark. So Lawrence is going to be under duress most likely. I think Travis Hunter is a fun pick, but for fantasy, I just, from a business standpoint, I just don't know what the upside truly is, but I know the downside could be developmental player, plays too much on defense. There's just a lot of uncertainty, and I don't know, and obviously this stage of draft, we're looking again in the 30s at receiver. There is uncertainty across the board, but I think when you hear the other two players going closer, there are different cases to be made, which now we are going to go with Jaylen Waddle and Jeudy. But first, Fantasy Sports Knockout, where a fantasy league meets a knockout pool, an innovative take on fantasy football. The concept's simple. Choose a new fantasy lineup each week and score points the same way you would in any fantasy league, but you must choose your players wisely. You can only use each player one time. The lowest weekly score or group of scores is eliminated from the contest every week. Concept's simple, but survival is not. How will you play? Load up early or play the matchups and save the better players for later. Fantasy Sports Knockout. Can you survive the fantasy? Sign up at play.fantasysportsknockout.com today. Again, that's play.fantasysportsknockout.com today. All right, next we got Jaylen Waddle. And how disappointing was Waddle last year? I was on his show last year, and I rarely listen to anybody else's take about players in terms of making my own decisions. And I had Waddle as a player I was not targeting, but I was convinced after talking to another sports analyst that the injuries of 2 years ago are what kept Jaylen Waddle down, and it made sense, and I bought into it. Fortunately, I wasn't overexposed to Waddle, but I had a couple shares. It was a couple shares too many for sure. Won't make that mistake again in terms of listening to maybe what the field is saying. Do my own research, use my own thoughts, and always stay with that. Anyway, we saw career low in catches, yards, and touchdowns, targets for Waddle. It was ugly. 744 yards, 2 touchdowns, 83 targets. He was always over 100 targets. Yards after the catch, 65th percentile. I attest that. And also Tyreek Hill was like 28th percentile yards after the catch. I attest that the defense is correcting to Tua Tagovailoa. Defenses realize he can't drive the ball to the perimeter. He underthrows deep passes, flood the short and intermediate area, make it tougher on Tagovailoa. And Tagovailoa had success still. But remember, it was a lot of dump offs to Jonnu Smith, screens to Devon Etienne, and it worked a lot. Jonnu Smith's gone. 111 targets vacated. Mike McDaniel, obviously coaching for his job this year. And I have to think, Tyreek Hill, he had a wrist injury last year, but that didn't explain his terrible yards after the catch rate, which was, again, way less than Jaylen Waddle's. So I think Hill is in a bit of decline. Say what you will, but the way I saw it was when Tua would underthrow that deep pass to Tyreek Hill, and I know I'm talking about Waddle here, but when Tyreek Hill would see those underthrown passes, he would run back, jump over the defenders, grab the ball, and he'd take off. Last year, those were incomplete passes. That was my litmus test that Tyreek Hill lost just a nano step. But for the player he was, so much better than everybody else with speed, I think now it's not world-changing speed. It's just regular superhero, no longer Superman. He is now more in the regular superhero category, and that's a drop-off. Jaylen Waddle, because of those 111 vacated targets from Jonnu Smith, Mike McDaniel, as I said, coaching for his job. Miami's defense, trying to paint it rosy, that defensive unit, yeah, they got a pass rush, but their cornerbacks, please, is one of the worst groups you'll see. I think teams will pick on them. Teams will score on them. And I think that Mike McDaniel is going to have to get that passing game going. And I know Tua is still getting out quickly. That's not changing. And I know it's a problem if Tua misses time. And that's always like a guarantee. But I do think as long as Tua's on the field, Waddle is going to see a drastic increase in targets. Remember, Tyreek Hill has stated 3 times he isn't happy in Miami. If the team goes off to a slow start, could see him getting pretty salty pretty quick. I think Waddle is going to get a lot of targets this year. The problem is when Tua misses time, you're going to Zach Wilson. And it's really hard to count on Zach Wilson. I know people are trying to paint him optimistic, but please, we don't want to see that movie again. So I think Waddle in the short term is a fine high floor play. And I think there's ceiling there. But again, if I'm attaching a player to Tua, I am terrified to do that because we saw that offense last year when he was out, and I don't know that it's much better, as I said, with Zach Wilson. So Jaylen Waddle, in theory, is a nice draft pick, but man, betting on Tua to stay healthy, that is really, really dicey. So that gives Waddle real downside as well. And then there's Jerry Jeudy. And in my mind, Jerry Jeudy is one of the best values in fantasy football drafts this year. Why? It wasn't just because of the 1,229 yards and 4 touchdowns last year. It was because he was being leaned on as a lead receiver. And I don't expect the Browns to have much of a rushing game here. Jerome Ford, Dylan Sampson, I have no idea as of this recording on August 27th what the Quinshon Judkins thing is going to be. Whether he eventually comes in, whether he's there at all, I have no idea. But I know right now that's not a sustaining rushing attack. They are going to have to throw. And it'll behoove them to keep Joe Flacco in as long as possible because if they have a project quarterback under center with no credible run game, it is going to be a problem because those quarterbacks are going to see more pressure than they know what to handle with. Flacco can get it out and deal with it and get the ball to his playmakers. So there's that. Jeudy has drop issues. I get it. But he's very good after the catch. And the targets last year, from week 8 on, Jeudy was getting 10 targets a game, averaging 96 yards a game. And look, Jameis Winston was a quarterback for some of that. But I also want to point out, Jerry Jeudy, that first game late in the season with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and I was terrified of it, and it was bad. But the next game Thompson-Robinson played, Jeudy had almost 20, don't quote me on the exact number, almost 20 PPR points in that second game with Dorian Thompson-Robinson. So Jeudy showed he could play with even bad quarterback play. Flacco, in my mind, will have the job for a while because Kevin Stefanski is a former coach of the year. He's coaching really for a long-term career. And also, they got to keep the locker room. If you go to a quarterback that can't move the offense, that locker room's going to go. Now, maybe the owner, Jimmy Haslam, has some say in this, but I still think Jerry Jeudy's going to get his targets. And you have to bring Dylan Gabriel in. Jerry Jeudy's still working in the short and intermediate area, so he is still going to be targeted heavily. I don't see too many scenarios aside from injury, which Jeudy's been relatively healthy, hasn't missed a ton of time in his career. So I think Jerry Jeudy is that player. He's going to get targets, and volume is king in fantasy football. I say that every show, right? But yes, I think Jerry Jeudy is the player. So in this group, Travis Hunter, Jaylen Waddle, Jerry Jeudy. I think Jerry Jeudy has the highest floor. And look, 1,229 yards last year. He has the highest ceiling probably. Jaylen Waddle, that's a tough one. And on Hunter, there's just so many unknowns around them. And Jeudy is usually cheaper than both in drafts. So when you're on that point in the clock, I'm just going with Jerry Jeudy. Now, if you want to shoot for the moon, that Liam Cohen is going to have this incredible offense and they're going to just feature Hunter as a number 2 receiver and maybe lessen his defensive snaps, which I don't know what they're going to do. I don't even know what they're going to be, honestly. So you could make that move. And so you could look at that and shoot for the moon there. But I think Jerry Jeudy, again, that floor and ceiling is something that I really want to have a part of in my fantasy football draft. All right, we are going to talk more ADP battles after we take a short break. All right, ADP battle number 3. You've got Chris Olave, Rome Odunze, and Jakobi Meyers, who recently requested a trade. All right, that said, we are going to talk about these 3 players, starting with Chris Olave. Again, these receivers are outside the top 30 receivers in fantasy football drafts. This is the next tier after the players we just went over, who were Jerry Jeudy, Jaylen Waddle, and did I say Travis Hunter? There we go. All right. So with these 3, Olave, it's simple. The concussions have been terrible, and you can't predict injury, and we don't know what's going to happen with him. We don't know if they'll get hit in the head. We don't know if that'll be a big problem. So there is massive risk. It's the easiest way we can say it. There's massive risk if you're drafting Chris Olave. Now, the cost is cheap. Remember, in the past, he was going as high as like wide receiver, other years, wide receiver 15. Oh, now we're looking into the 30s. So that injury discount is completely baked in. And I know the quarterback situation in New Orleans is not exactly what we want to see. Tyler Shuck is going to be the backup, and Spencer Rattler is going to start, and it probably goes back and forth time and again. But look, every team is going to throw for 2,500 yards, somewhere in that range. There's going to be passing yards in every offense in the NFL. So, and how many people is it to go around to? Rashid Shaheed's a really nice player, and he can do a lot of things, but his best attribute is getting downfield. And I don't know how much downfield passing this offense is going to be able to get with these limited quarterbacks. Olave is going to be obviously that X-type receiver, line up on the line, take the press coverage, but can win, in the short and intermediate areas with no issue. Chris Olave has not had the best situations in his career. But I'll tell you this, last year, there were 4 games in 6 full outings that he hit at least 81 yards. And in his career, when Olave gets 6 targets or more in a game, he's almost a lock for 81 yards. He is that good, but we don't talk about him. He's been on the Saints and he's been injured, and I get it. But I do have to think that as long as he is on the field, and this Saints defense is probably going to be bad. They lost Coach Dennis Allen. They've been hemorrhaging talent for years. This defense is probably going to be bottom 8. And if that's the case, this team's going to have to throw the ball. So Olave, again, health is your question. But when he's on the field, if he's not seeing at least 8 targets a game, that's going to be a real problem. And I have to think that Chris Olave is going to have floor and ceiling potential most weeks. Your decision. Can you deal with the potential if he gets another concussion of being put down for the season or long term? His health is more important than anything, and I'm not diminishing that because that's all we care about. We want the young man to be healthy, but for fantasy, we got to talk that. And so it is injury risk. But if he's your number 4 receiver in your roster build, and you have him in your lineup, he could be a game flipper for you. So you got to think about that. Rome Odunze of the Bears is next. And Odunze puts up 54 catches, 734 yards, 3 touchdowns as a rookie. And we talked about this last year. Last year, the Bears had Shane Waldron to start the season as their coach. And I made the connection. I said, Waldron had been in Seattle in 2023. We had DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and then at that time, the rookie Jackson Smith-Njigba. And we saw Smith-Njigba had significantly less snaps and targets than Metcalf and Lockett. And we said last year, Odunze will be in that same situation. Keenan Allen and DJ Moore would get the targets. Odunze would be the third wheel. And that's exactly how it worked out. Even when the Bears switched to Thomas Moore, an offensive coordinator, not much change. Although Odunze did see more targets in the second half of the season. So that was a positive for sure. It was 6.5 targets a game after week 7. So it did increase a bit. It never got to the levels we needed it to be. But remember how dysfunctional that Bears offense was. Offensive line couldn't read simulated pressures. They didn't protect. Caleb Williams was under siege. The plays he wasn't under siege, he was probably waiting for the pressure and antsy. And so Odunze, and he was not, the offense was so schemed so poorly. Odunze was never like fully weaponized. This year is going to be different. Remember, Odunze was a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. That doesn't mean you're guaranteed success. But if you bought it on Odunze last year as a talented player, those Bears players have to get a pass for last year. It was such a toxic situation. Right now, we have Odunze being used that X receiver. That doesn't mean you're the number one. The X means you line, as I said with Olave, you line up on the line of scrimmage. You're taking on the press man. You can win in the short and intermediate area. Big third down, go-to guy that can win those. But DJ Moore, in my mind, is the big weapon here. But that doesn't mean they both can't eat. The Bears defense could be good because they did bring in Dennis Allen from the aforementioned Saints a minute ago. But I still think the Bears, with their tougher schedule, they're going to be in a lot of games where they have to throw. And do the Bears really trust their rushing attack to be the big mover for them? And I don't think that's the case. DeAndre Swift, Kyle Monangai, a little Roshan Johnson. I think this team's going to be pass heavy. I think they're going to have to be pass heavy. And as a result, the offensive line was upgraded, as I said. Ben Johnson, give him a couple weeks. The first couple weeks, it might take a little time to get everything like rolling. Maybe it's right away. But I do think by week 3, Odunze is going to be heavily involved. He's going to be very productive. He can win intermediate and downfield as well. And I do think he's going to be a major component of this Ben Johnson offense. So I think, look, Odunze, we don't know what the floor is. We really don't. We haven't seen him because we saw him last year in a dysfunctional offense. So we don't know what the floor is. But I do have to believe the ceiling is immense because we did see a couple 100-yard games. We saw that he had the ability to make big plays. A lot of the downfield throws he saw, which are low percentage passes to start, were problematic. Because, again, Williams is constantly under siege. But I think Rome Odunze is like a swing for the fence type breakout player, and he could hit that breakout. The Bears could have 2 like big-time receivers in their offense. And then there's Jakobi Meyers. And until a couple days ago, Jakobi Meyers was a player I was very excited to draft as my 3rd or 4th receiver for a high floor. Remember last year, Devontae Adams gets traded, and man, it was crazy. Meyers was getting at least 9 targets in 10 different games after that trade. It was wild that he was putting up the numbers to go with that. Meyers was high floor, reasonable ceiling, and we were expecting the same. Now, the next part is we know they signed Amari Cooper, and a lot of people are going to be like, oh, Amari Cooper is done. He's toast. He's 31. I get it. I completely get it. I want you to understand this about Amari Cooper, and I might be wrong. Amari Cooper was traded, remember, in week 7 to Buffalo. But in those first 6 games, that Browns offense was horrific. No offensive line. The quarterback play was atrocious. Amari Cooper was pretty darn productive in those first 6 weeks with the Browns. He had a couple down games, but he had a 2 touchdown game, I believe 80-plus yards. He was still playing well in a horrible situation. When he went to Buffalo, I think he had 566 and a touchdown, maybe his first or second game. Nobody's talking about this. He suffered a wrist injury. Well, go back and check the news reports on Amari Cooper. And because it'll tell you that Amari Cooper was supposed to have that wrist surgically repaired, but he played through it the rest of the season. He was never a factor. It was probably a broken wrist. And he's playing through that all year. Well, of course, Amari Cooper did nothing. And obviously, how acclimated to the offense was he? I know he had the one big game, but the Bills were about spreading it around anyway. But now you got a player with a broken wrist, and his snaps were limited, of course. So the point is, Amari Cooper is now in that Raiders rotation. And maybe week 1 he doesn't take off, but Geno Smith will throw the ball downfield. And I know Dante Thornton was a big bust, but Cooper's an intermediate and downfield receiver, and he's very good at that. And so I think that Meyers now is not going to see anywhere near the targets he would have seen before Cooper was in. Week 1 and 2, Meyers might be fine for that. And Meyers is a good trade candidate if he comes out the gate hot in week 1 and 2, especially if you think you're watching the film and you see signs of life from Cooper. Because if you see that, now you got to think to yourself, wait a minute. Maybe Cooper is going to improve as the year goes on, and that would be the expense of Meyers. So that's what I want you to pay attention to. If you've already drafted Meyers, that's important. Now, in terms of the draft, that's a question. I think the Raiders are going to trail a ton, but you got Bowers in there, and you'll have Cooper, and you'll have Meyers, and I don't know now how they'll handle the other outside position because Cooper is more of a downfield guy, but they might want 2 people to stretch the field. So it could be, Dante Thornton in there as well. But that said, I think Meyers' safe, super high floor is now in question. And so I think we got to worry about that. So of these 3 players, look, I think the best bet for the breakout season is Rome Odunze. I don't think among these 3 we could say there's any longer a safe floor play. Meyers was. He's not now, I don't believe. If you don't believe Cooper's a factor, then you make Meyers your floor play and you keep him there. Chris Olave, because of the injury history, if you are injury agnostic and you think the concussions were just, look, a lot of players are concussed every year. Olave happened to have 2 in 1 year. Doesn't mean he's going to get one this year. Doesn't mean if he gets one, his season's over. So Olave, if you're going to push the injury to the side and say you're going to take your chance at it, Olave is the best bet for floor and ceiling in this group. But again, I think Odunze will learn to have more of a floor than we think. And Odunze is probably the best pick in this group. But again, Meyers, the air kind of went out of the balloon on that one because of the Amari Cooper, in my opinion. Again, I'll repeat it. If you think Cooper's not going to be a factor, then you treat Meyers as you always did, because Cooper is 31. And we know that age is not kind to many receivers. So again, you got to be cognizant of that. Hey, fantasy football players, aren't you done watching your season crumble because of injuries or underperforming players? You join the RotoWire League today on the Renegade Fantasy app, the only app that lets you substitute players in real time. You go to rotowire.renegadefantasy.com and you hit join today. With Renegade, you're not just the GM, you're the coach. No more losing Sundays, no more lost points. You call the shots, you make the moves, you win the league. Step out of the luxury box and onto the field. This is fantasy football without limits. This is Renegade Fantasy. Again, you join the RotoWire League today and you win. You visit rotowire.renegadefantasy.com and you join the league today. And now we have wide receiver, ADP battle number 4. This is running backs. Zach Charbonnet, who's moving up those draft boards, J.K. Dobbins, and Travis Etienne. So the camp buzz has gotten heavy on Charbonnet in the last week or so. Reports are kind of floating around that Charbonnet is going to be a much bigger factor than just a little occasional change of pace warm-up guy that he was for Ken Walker. He was really the second act. Now, of course, when Charbonnet would have Kenneth Walker out, he was getting obviously all the work and doing great. But the talk is this could be a real timeshare. So first thing I want to talk about is, and I have to reference Kenneth Walker, okay? Kenneth Walker has been steaming up draft boards because everybody's got this talk about, Clint Kubiak and that outside zone run game. It's going to be the savior for Ken Walker. Pump the brakes. First of all, I want you to know this. That offense in Seattle, Sam Darnold is a quarterback. There is no defense that has said, oh man, we got to defend the pass. We got to worry about that. Second thing, their wide receiver room. Cooper Kupp, now he's the number 2, and I want to talk about him first, though. He was relegated out of his own offense by Sean McVay last year down the stretch. The last 3 games, barely utilized at all. If that doesn't tell you that Cooper Kupp is done as a receiver, I don't know what does. He can still block, and there's a lot of value to that for what they want to do here, but I don't think his days of being a good receiver are there. JSN, obviously, short and intermediate guys, and they get all the targets you can handle, and that's a beautiful thing. And then they're hoping that they can get the rookie late round draft pick, Troy Horton. They get him to be a big deal. Maybe he had a nice camp, but am I going to hinge my season and say we have Horton, so now we are this massive passing? I don't think so. Offensive line's decent. So here's my point. My point is this. We saw last year, Kubiak ran that outside zone in New Orleans. And we saw Vic Fangio say, oh, okay, I see what you're doing. I'm going to put 5 or 6 defensive linemen in, and now you don't have any zones to run in. And it didn't work. They stuffed Alvin Kamara, nowhere to go. Well, what do you think's going to happen this year? Sam Darnold, like I said, seriously? No defense respects him. The receivers, all right, JSN wins short and intermediate. Don't care. We don't have to play anybody deep. We could take our chances and just basically move everybody down. Darnold wins deep once or twice, God bless him. But I don't think that's – so I think there are going to be so many bodies compressed in the short area of the field that this rushing attack's going to be in a bit of problem. Now, Charbonnet may actually have the advantage over Walker because he runs more powerfully. Charbonnet will get downhill, and sometimes that will mitigate some of the overplaying of the defense against the run. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be a superstar in this. I think this offense is really going to struggle. But their defense should be pretty good, and there are games where they should be able to keep close. So I think there will be opportunity and volume. But I don't think Walker is anymore this so far ahead of Charbonnet. I think we saw it last year. Charbonnet looked good, and I think the team realized that. So I think this is going to be more of a two-headed monster than we believe. Charbonnet, you're getting at running back 3 costs, which I think gives him a floor, but it's not safe because I don't think Walker's going to do a lot here. But if you believe Kenneth Walker is going to be the deal, then you've got to say, well, if he is that good, then he's going to push Charbonnet aside. And in that case, this is a high cost for Charbonnet because we're counting on the Cant buzz that he's getting more work. J.K. Dobbins is next. I want you to remember this. J.K. Dobbins last year, the first 2 games, he was the RB3. 27 carries, 255 yards, and 2 touchdowns. After that, the last 11 games he played, he had a knee injury, missed about a month. 3.86 yards per carry, 168 carries, 650 yards. Basically, we saw 2 weeks of elite production and then not a whole lot else. Now, from week 3 on, he averaged 12.6 PPR points, so it was decent. But again, this isn't a team that was committed to the run. They were using extra tight ends and using extra fullbacks. They were committed to it, and which is fine because now in Los Angeles, where Dobbins, oh my God, I lost my train of thought there. So now J.K. Dobbins in Denver is going to be in a system where the offensive line's outstanding. You're going to play with R.J. Harvey in the backfield. And I think this team actually is not only committed to the run, but they have a much better line than the Chargers had for Dobbins last year. And that's going to be a big deal. So I think Dobbins is going to be effective, and he's going to be utilized. Both running backs will be utilized because that defense is borderline elite. They made 3 big offseason acquisitions in Denver, and they may play with a lot of leads. So they may be running in the 4th quarter. Just don't forget, Dobbins has been in the league 5 years, and he's only played in 44% of the available games. One was an entire midseason. One was a week 1 injury. But he has, even last year, like I said, he missed about a month. Durability is a problem. So to count on J.K. Dobbins for a full season, ambitious. But when he's on the field in this Denver system, he should be very effective. I think he does have a high floor in those weeks, but you have to be ready to embrace the injury risk that's there. And then we have Travis Etienne. This is a tough call because as of this recording, August 27th, the team said they could explore trading Etienne or Bigsby. So as it's recording, they're all together on Jacksonville. But we know Travis Etienne had 2 really good seasons, but his touch counts were very drastically different. But last year, career worst, 3.7 yards per carry, 16th percentile broken tackle rate, 34th percentile yards after contact. In his defense, offensive line, coaching has been horrible in Jacksonville. Now, the place where I like Etienne is this. Liam Cohen, I said earlier in the show, developed an amazing screen game in Tampa Bay. If he brings any elements of that screen game, again, the offensive line's not what it was in Tampa, but if he brings any elements of that to Jacksonville, Travis Etienne is the best suited to be in that heavy receiving role. And I do, as of today, I believe that's going to be his role. He'll get some carries, but I think he'll be splitting carries with both Bigsby and Tootin. And Etienne may get the less carries of the 3. But I do think there's a world where he catches 60 passes. And that sounds like a lot, but the way Cohen may lean on that screen game, I don't think it's out of the question. And so in the PPR league, as a later pick. I do like Etienne for that. And don't rule this out. Etienne may be a better running back than we've seen the last couple of years. Maybe it was the situations. And if he comes in and he looks like the player we saw a couple of years ago, all of a sudden the team might say, you know what? We got to give you more rushing work. And then Etienne not just has a floor, but he has incredible upside. So of these three, I think Etienne is your player if you want to shoot for ceiling. If you don't believe that he can ever bounce back to what he was a few years ago, then fade him. I think the floor play is Dobbins, but there's a lot of risk. I think Charbonnet has the lowest floor and lowest ceiling. You're betting on a Kenneth Walker injury, which could happen. Walker missed 6 games last year, 2 in each of the prior 2 years. But that's the way I break that one down. Hey, we want to thank our sponsor, Circa Million at Circa Survivor Contest. Thanks to everyone for listening. Come back next week for another edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast.